My name is Phil Perazio, and I'm a urologic oncologist, a surgeon. Like many of you, I absolutely love what I do, and I would not choose another profession. But I have struggled with professional identity, practice efficiency, and wellness over the years. Operate with Zen is a podcast designed to explore a mindful approach to surgery and to being a surgeon. By discussing these struggles and mindful solutions, I hope together we can create a community of strong and healthy surgeons. Enjoy. All right. And welcome to Operate with Zen. In today's episode, we have the great pleasure of being joined by Dr. Steve Nakada, and we're going to be talking about leadership and mindful leadership. Dr. Nakada, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name is Stephen Nakada. I'm the current chair at the University of Wisconsin's Department of Urology. I also am the chief administrative physician of the practice plan here at the UW Medical Foundation.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. You know, I've interacted with you many, many times over the last several years, and some of it's been through endourology realms and seeing the great work you've done there. And some of it's been through leadership and seeing the great kind of talks and advice you've given young and growing urologists and physicians. And so that's kind of where I wanted to start today. I wanted to start with your personal leadership story, if you don't mind. When did you make the transition from just being a urologist to being a leader and being a really effective leader?
Yeah, so I did my residency in urology at the University of Rochester, upstate New York, a great program. And I did my fellowship at Washington University under Bill Catalona, Ralph Clayman, or actually Ralph Clayman, Bill Catalona, and came to Wisconsin in 1995 as an assistant professor. And, you know, pretty much on short order, our chairman was nearing retirement, which I sort of knew. So in 2001, he made the move to step down and retire. So I became a candidate. And, you know, through, you know, the circumstances, I was selected. And that really was, you know, the first leadership opportunity I had. Now, the real question is, when did I become a better leader? And, you know, it might not have been at that moment in 2001, because I think it is a big step. But certainly when I took over, what I demonstrated was my ability to lead a small group, and more importantly, my ability to be successful both clinically and academically, you know, including research. So I think the areas of leadership that really, you know, take more time and experience, you know, involve larger, more diverse groups of folks, not just urologists, but people outside of the medical field even. I think the other, you know, key point is, you know, understanding how important every word is that you say and how important every interaction is. And most importantly, I think, to create, you know, sort of the vision and the optimism, and, you know, be the magnet for, you know, other top young people to want to join you. And that's a big step from where I was sitting in 2001. And I think that's a journey that took time. And as we grew as a division, you know, my feeling was, it was simple. Our goal was to become a department. And we were supposed to do that in 10 years. And I think early on that made my job easier, because every critical decision that came in front of my desk or in front of our team, we would say, well, is this going to help us towards our departmental goal or not? And if it was, we would do it. If it wasn't, we wouldn't. And we studied what other departments did in the medical center. And so we said, well, we're going to act like other departments. So we're going to populate committees. across the health system. You know, we're going to seek to market the importance of urologic disease and the treatment of urology. And all that ultimately led to an opportunity in 2008 as our chair of surgery stepped down and as we got a new dean to become a department. And I think at that stage we had developed sort of a good enough portfolio, you know, to pursue this. And so I was excited. One of my colleagues, Dave Gerard, who's sort of been my right-hand man for these 25 years, we agreed this was the approach. And then I remember the new dean said, I asked for a meeting with the dean to talk about this, and the new dean said, I'm happy to meet with you, but I'll tell you, Steve, you know, we're not going to make you a department. That's just not something we're going to do. You know, my goal is not to increase the number of department chairs. You know, if you want to be the head of surgery, I recommend you put your CV in the hat. You'd be qualified, but I'm not going to do it. So, you know, I went back to Dave and our team and said, boy, he's negative. And the team said, listen, you know, we've done it all right. You know, I say you go and present and see what he says. So I did that. And after a 45-minute meeting, you know, he agreed. And that was sort of the beginning for us, and the beginning for me to be a department chair, which is at that time was substantively different. And that at that time also, it was unusual for a division to become a department without a leadership change within the department, with, you know, of the urologist per se. So that was a big part of the journey. I would say the other part of the journey for me has been leading, you know, other organizations. It started with the Wisconsin Urologic Society, which they were at the time, you know, you volunteered to be the president. Now it's actually quite competitive. And then I became involved with the North Central section. So I was the president, eventually secretary and president of the North Central section. I've also been the president, secretary general and president of the Endourological Society. And I've been a trustee and president of the American Board of Urology. So I've, and the SAU for that matter, but I've done a lot of that work. And I think there are many lessons there that are very similar to the lessons of being a departmental leader and a leader in general. And I think the lesson that to me is the most important is you have to take a very careful and good look at the organization you're leading and the people you're leading. Try to understand, you know, where they are, and then identify, you know, what should be the best next steps. And I think once you've established that, then you bring everyone along on that journey. And I think where many people struggle is when they come into a position, they say, well, here's my agenda, or these are the things I want to do. And, you know, that may just not fit. So it doesn't matter who's in charge. You're just not going to convince all these people to carry out your agenda. And sure, I started by saying, we became a division. I took over the division. We wanted to be a department. I mean, I obviously asked. And I think all but, you know, the majority of the folks wanted sort of to have our own autonomy. Maybe one or two sort of like being attached to surgery. And we had those conversations. And ultimately, one of the things that came to our attention was if we became a department, our pay may come down, you know, our salaries may come down. And everyone agreed eventually that that would be okay. And then in the end, our salaries went up because there were just other things we just didn't know about in terms of funding. But I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, you have to sort of take the temperature of the people you're leading. You have to figure out how to do that. And the good news is that's a good process, you know, because people love it when the boss says, well, what do you think we should do? And I think it's one thing to ask, and then it's another thing to mean it, right? And I think in some ways, leadership is really, you know, sort of servant leadership, to use a term that you know well. I mean, I'm here to help everybody else, frankly. And if we're successful, then I'm successful. And that might sound simple, but it's not, as you well know. So, that's my opening gambit on this thing.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. There's a ton to unpack there,
Sure.
and I've been jotting some feverish notes and things I want to talk to you about, and I'm sure our audience wants to know. But let's segue right into, you talked about people and kind of understanding the culture you're leading, and I think that's a point where people can fail miserably, but is by trying to impart themselves too soon and not understanding the culture. But to some degree, to be successful and impart your agenda, you do have to change culture. And sometimes that's a little change, and sometimes that's a big change. How have you kind of approached cultural changes within your group or, other groups?
Yeah, generally culture change is big, even though you can say it's small, but usually if it's tangible, it's bigger. But I think, one truth is, your goal when you're changing culture is it's sort of like if you're on a ship, if you're on a cruise line, you want to change the direction of the ship without anyone noticing, right? I mean, ultimately, that's the best goal. But I do think, the first thing you do with culture is you have to lead by example. I mean, there's no question. And I think how you conduct yourself, and how you as the leader listen and ask questions, that's culture changing, usually from the get-go, frankly. And that's probably one of the harder skills for leaders to attain, and myself included. And one of the reasons it's a harder skill is because, to get into the position to become a leader, to some degree, you don't listen. You do what you think you need to do, and you use all your resources to get there. And then suddenly when you're there, now you have to lead people. So you have to figure out what it is the group will succeed with. And I think that's something I learned relatively early, that it's great to listen. And I can tell on my own team, which folks really get it and are going to go quickly up the ladder, and others who need help. And ultimately, that's an important truth too. I mean, I think, part of changing culture is the concept that you're there to help, your colleagues and your teammates, achieve their goals. So you're not going to really know what their goals are without listening. And I think this well too, is that it takes a while for people to tell you the truth, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I think obviously this podcast focuses a little bit on mindful approaches, and one of the big things that's really hard for surgeons is to be a good listener. We're so good at picking the exact pathway we want and dictating that pathway, and sometimes when we're interacting with a colleague, it's really hard to not interject kind of our expert thoughts and our expert mind onto them. And sitting back and being a good listener is a really important skill, as you not necessarily even climb the ladder of leadership, but just to be a good colleague is to learn how to be a good listener.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's like this, there's this concept or verbiage of ship of leaders, and I think, truthfully, ultimately, that's what we all want to do. And I found working in small groups, is great. So the idea of, having sections within a department, divisions within a department, these are great, opportunities, just like in sports where they have pods, of players that are like-minded or not like-minded, that you put together so that they can communicate. And I do see one of the challenges in this sort of lead and listen approach is it's a numbers game, right? I mean, we have 24 faculty now. So, I can't sit down every month and meet with all 24 for 30 minutes. So, we need to do things in small group, knowing that, everyone has their chance to give their position, speak, and so on.
So I'm assuming when you started, you had a handful of faculty, now 24, you said. So you've obviously recruited, and you talked about being a magnet for talent before. So how do you how do you judge that talent? How do you try and magnetize them? How do you bring them in, and who are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree in academic urology, it's a small community. So, I think people tend to look at places and programs where younger people have been successful. So to some degree, it's self-fulfilling in that regard. I think the harder part of that question is how do you make the right choices, and that's hard, and I'd make the case, we've done better than most maybe, but it's not easy, and I think to me, and I've spoken with chairs about this, usually a good recruit is a two-way street. And by that, I mean, it's if you're recruiting somebody that you really want, and then they really want to be here for some reason, that's a winner, and that's kind of, your sort of A+ recruit. And then everything else falls off from there. And I think, there are circumstances, sure, that certain specialties are very hard to recruit, and then you're suddenly looking at a different pool of candidates or a smaller pool of candidates. I think, Madison over the years, and the 25 years I've been here, has become a much more appreciated destination than I think in 1995. And even in 2001, I was remembering trying to attract some top faculty and, meeting them at the snow-laden airport, here in Madison, thinking, why would these people come here? And I think I've learned since then, number one, don't necessarily have your interviews in February, but more importantly, I think the town and the area has gotten much easier to live in, and it's a great experience for the right people. So, there's a lot to that, and I think, truthfully, a lot of it is effort. I think how hard you look at the CV, how you do your homework, how you kind of assess the interview, is key. And truthfully, I'm not necessarily trying to identify people that aren't as good. I'm just trying to identify people that I don't think are going to be as successful here, knowing our own culture. And I've gotten better, and we've gotten better over time because we understand our culture better. So.
That's great. I'll tell you, I visited Madison in February. It depends on the right person. I stayed on the lake. The Capitol was behind me. I thought it was absolutely gorgeous, but it was also my first kind of
right person. Yeah.
Yeah. It was also my first kind of lake experience. And you got to see the cars drive out and deliver pizzas to the guys and girls ice fishing in the middle of the lake. So that was, it was definitely interesting. And I found it cold, but intriguing.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So as we're on kind of the topic of faculty development, we're talking about leadership today. So how do you recognize leaders? How do you develop leaders? Are these born qualities? Are these developed qualities? How does that work?
I think definitely these are not born qualities. You're not innately born to lead. I think you need two elements to lead. One is you need to want to do it. And I don't know that you're born to want something, so I would say you have to have the passion to lead, and then you have to be sort of negotiable with yourself in terms of understanding that you need to prepare to lead. And obviously, we've been over this for years, that historically the attributes that make you chairman or make you a leader are not necessarily the attributes that you need to be a good leader or a great leader, right? I mean, having a great academic career, being a great surgeon, those are usually the things that get you into the leadership seat. But in point of fact, when you're the leader, if you do more surgery and do more research on your own, you're going to be alone. So I think sort of this emotional intelligence, the idea that, you can inspire others and help others, that's the key, and people have to figure out how to do that. And then ultimately you have to figure out how to negotiate, right? And you have to communicate. And usually communicating and negotiating go hand in hand. So I think if those are weak areas for you, you can learn. You know, there you can take courses, you can learn from others. I think there's no doubt education, you know, can take a role. Like I think, you know, I don't have a degree like an MHA or an MMM or an MBA, but those degrees help you because you'll learn a lot of those skills as part of probably gaining those degrees. But I think, again, adaptation and flexibility are the keys, particularly to long-term success in leadership. And I think everybody wants to do it long-term to some degree. And, you know, we're learning every day. There's no doubt.
Yeah. One of the things you brought up there was having a passion for leadership. And in your book, and if the audience isn't aware, Navigating Organized Urology, you're the editor and obviously write a fair amount of the book. You talk about strategies for career success. And I believe it's performance, purpose leads to passion, and the things you're really good at and the things you really see. So how do you help cultivate that in your faculty, in your residents, in the people you're leading?
Yeah, so thanks for you know, propping up the book. I appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, I think again, this is the first thing is you got to ask the question. You know, that's the biggest thing, I think, is sort of what do you want to do? You know, and why do you want to do it? And you know, there's an interesting study, not to quote the Mayo Clinic because you know, I don't want to saddle them with this, but you know, one of the things that was presented from the Mayo Clinic was if you work 5 days a week, you know, the best approach is for job satisfaction is that 20% of that time you're doing what you want to do, passionate about. And you know, they thought this was a fairly cogent, you know, forward-thinking approach. And my immediate thought was, boy, I don't want to work there because that means 80% of the time I'm going to be doing something I don't want to do. So I think you have to, you know, kind of identify what gets you going, and then, you know, just seek to get to that end. And you know, I'm comfortable having those discussions with folks. And sure, you have to put the brakes on to an extent. But, you know, if you want to be the best urologic oncologist on earth, you know, there are things you clearly have to do that others don't have to do. So are you prepared to do that? And I think sort of the frankness of feedback is the key. And, you know, I recently gave, you know, a brief leadership talk at the Young Urologists at the AUA. And one of the slides that got the most interest was the one on giving negative feedback, because I think that's critical. You just have to try to figure out a way to give it and not be demeaning or insulting or too demanding. So one of my favorite lines is, you know, that's good, but it's not great. You know, if you want to be great, this is what you needed to do. You know, this gets you your certification, but that's about it. You know, and I think it's good to, you know, have those, you know, giving feedback's the hardest thing we do. And, you know, ironically, it's probably underappreciated. And I remember when I was program director, you know, before I had someone else do it, you know, it was always a chore to do all the evaluations, right, of the residents, and then for the residents to evaluate the faculty. But in the end, that's the most important exercise we do. And so I think the cultivating rather, the 3 Ps, a lot of that is just, you know, every day talking about how we're doing things, what could be better, and how to be better.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. You talked very early on in leadership how important every word and interaction you have can be. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind expanding on that a little bit. Tell us what you mean by the importance of every word and interaction. Well,
a great example is when I first became division chair, one of my good colleagues, who was older than me, you know, we would all, he's a very bright guy, and we would talk about cases. And so, like, if I wasn't sure or I saw an interesting case, I want to talk to him, you know, I'd have to find him, so I'd page him. And then after about a month, he said, Steve, you got to stop paging me. And I go, why? He goes, because every time I see your office number, I panic, you know, and I assume I've done something wrong. So that was me just not being self-aware that now that I'm the chairman, if I page you, it's different than if your colleague pages you. So yes, you have to be self-aware of all the things you say. And, I think that comes with experience. It's just a challenge to be perfect, but I do think I try to explain what I see in a positive way. And using humor is not a bad thing, but I think you have to be able to carefully give, feedback. And again, good but not great is one. I heard one recently, which I thought was really good, where someone just said, you're too important to this organization to be making mistakes like this. So that's, I think, a fair way to say it, right? And I think if you never say it, then you can't fix it. And part of my job is to direct people, towards their strengths. And so I think hard. And so one thing I do, and I talk about this, I think, in the book, is you sort of, just like with surgery, so getting to the Zen piece, right? Great surgeons think about the operation, right? And think about how you can do it better. Ralph Klayman used to look at the videotape of his laparoscopic nephrectomies, early on in that experience to figure out how to do the operation better. I thought that was brilliant. And so I try to visualize a lot of things, from surgery to what I say to a faculty member, and even potentially how I'll present a topic, because it can be seen differently. And in point of fact, certain things that I bring to the faculty, I will show to a few select people who I know will just give me real feedback and say, Steve, this is BS. You have to just say it this way. And I think a good general rule is, like, whenever I walk into a room, I assume I'm in the bottom quartile in intelligence in that room. And it's probably right? I mean, if I'm speaking to you now, I'm sure your IQ is higher than mine, and you're just listening, to get the information to your audience. And I think that's an important truth, in that, yeah, you got to get the feedback and then get it right yourself too, since that's what you're teaching everybody.
And I think you'd be surprised at how dumb I am occasionally. But I think it's a great point you bring up about presence and self-awareness and kind of understanding how you fit into a room. I think one of the great examples you give in the book as well is Tiger Woods during the Tiger Slam, how he knew he was not a good sand player and kind of was very self-aware. And you said, yeah, he could have worked on his sand game and improved his weaknesses. But in that short time course where he had the last major coming up, really focused his game on staying out of sand traps and being successful that way. I think that's a great analogy. And there are a lot of great sports and surgery analogies, but I thought that was a great one you brought forth.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I think, like, the biggest thing, I think, in the long run for leadership and for success is sort of understanding team dynamics, and understanding sort of, and as our department, I'll use our department as an example. I mean, at some point, we as a group sort of began to realize not everyone can have a NIH funded lab. Not everyone, is going to travel and speak at meetings. And so you have to begin to have everyone plays a role, and role players. And again, I think the great teams do that as well. You have, your people that rebound, like Dennis Rodman, then you have Michael Jordan on that same team, and you put all these people together, and then you have something that's irresistible. Others have said to me when I brought that vision in the past, say, well, urology isn't the NBA or isn't the PGA Tour, but urology is still about people, and I think, to a large extent, understanding the dynamics of your team, is important. And today more than ever, Google's a good example. I mean, they understand, all the team members, and if everyone's not speaking or people are inhibited from speaking, that's a problem of the team. It's a group problem, not an individual problem, which I wouldn't have said 10 years ago, frankly.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and I love the Bulls analogy. I was a Knicks fan growing up in New York and had a lot of heartbreak
Me too.
watching the Bulls win. But I think where people get into the problem is where they think Michael Jordan is more valuable than Dennis Rodman, right? They have a different skill set, and Michael Jordan would not have been as successful without Dennis Rodman. The team would not have been as successful without Scottie Pippen. You needed all of those players to come together and play their roles and do the things they do well. And I think we see the same thing in surgery, right? Our surgeries aren't successful if we don't have a good nursing staff or a good tech team, right? Or it could be more successful with good teams. And doesn't mean the surgeon's better than the nurse or the anesthesiologist. No, we're all part of the same organization and the same structure with the same goals.
And I think COVID has been an example. It's a really testing example, because now we're coming out of it somewhat now, but a lot of the interactions you have to have in critical moments are virtual. And I think that's where, a lot of it's luck of the draw. If you already have a strong team assembled, you could make the case you'll do better, because you'll have all your faculty at every meeting because you just have to turn on your computer. On the other hand, if you're a new chair and you're building a team, I think that provides or causes unique challenges. But ultimately, I think, the leader, what do leaders have to do? And basically, my boss said it best. It's three things, right? Chairmen or leaders have to master logistics, right? That's the first thing, and so that's the basics: organization, balance the budget, prepare the department report. The second is manage crises, and I think a crisis, really tells you who the leader is, right? I think, and COVID was a great example. And I think nationally, we got great evidence of which departments and programs and institutes were prepared, for this crisis and could manage it and create data, create educational programs, and others that couldn't. So crisis definitely separates it out. And then finally, the third is common sense. If you can do the first two things and have common sense, then you have the whole package. Because I think at times when you're mastering logistics and you're in a crisis, sometimes common sense is lost. So I think the top people can sit down and say, well, we're just not at some point, going to continue X, Y, or Z. And in the case of COVID, there had to be a point where you had to, either change how you were doing things or, secede to the health system. But anyway.
So we've been talking for a while. We're getting towards the end. We've talked a ton about leadership successes. If you wouldn't mind, take us through leadership failures and how you manage the other side.
Yeah, I think, the first truth is, if you've been a leader at the time and you say you've never had a failure, you're either lying or it's time to write the book, and I'm interested. And I think it's pretty simple in terms of management of a failure. And that's, you have to admit to it. I think in the end, there's nothing more powerful than saying, you made a mistake and, you take full responsibility for it and, you'll do your best to make amends for it. And I think most leaders make mistakes, and the key is the great ones. I'm not saying I'm a great one, but a great leader will have many more successes than failures, right? And one of my old attendings used to say every time we had a complication, he goes, we got to learn from this, and we got to have a lot of cases go well before we kind of exonerate ourselves from this. And I think that's true. So that's my thought on how you manage it. Personal failures, I'm trying to decide what would be appropriate to talk about, but I would say for the most part, the biggest thing that I see as an area of improvement for myself is, at some point if you see someone has talent, but they don't necessarily want to use it, you know, I have to be quicker to accept that. And I think I can see certain folks that I work with that have so much ability, yet it's just not a priority. So I have to sort of come to grips more quickly with the concept to say, that's okay. I get that, for you, this is 8 to 5, and obviously the work you do is outstanding, and we're just lucky to have you. And I find it hard to not, move that person forward, but maybe those are areas and circumstances they just don't want to be in because their personal lives are more important. And I think to some degree, COVID kind of shows us this too, right? In the sense that people do begin to, reevaluate and reassess with all that's happening. And to me, what's interesting in terms of all the conversations I've had is a lot of the people that I view as leaders in our field are even more invigorated, because of the crisis we've been through. And so that's kind of a true stamp. So maybe to me, the not seeing the same degree of engagement that I might have myself is hard, and I got to let that go. So there you have it.
Yeah, I used to call it Dr. Walsh used to give us, we used to call it the SpiderMan Talk. With great power comes great responsibility, and some people take that in one direction, and it washes over some people as well.
Yeah, I've heard the SpiderMan Talk story, and my thought on it, Phil, and I think it's an important question. I mean, I think, do you give the SpiderMan Talk anymore in 2021? Yeah. I think it's almost better that you don't, because you might, trick someone into the wrong thing. Yeah. And more wait for them to ask you about the blue and red suit.
No, I think you're right. As you said kind of before, you have to want to fill that role, right? And you have to negotiate with yourself and be willing to make the sacrifices to get there. And forcing that on somebody is a mistake for both people.
Yeah, let me tell you a quick story just because it comes to mind. I remember I was a junior faculty at the time, which wasn't for very long, as you know, probably 6 years. But in that period, we had this really outstanding resident. And my boss said, hey, listen, you got to talk Dr. X into going into academics, because he wants to go into private practice. And I think, you can convince him, you're a great role model for this. You can convince him. I said, of course. So I call him into my office and we start talking. And again, here in the IQ scale, he's got more, so I'm just listening, and he's telling me, well, he's got all these plans, and, he can join this practice. And so he goes, so what do you think? And I said, shoot, that sounds good to me. You're exactly where you want to be, and so anyway, he leaves my office, and my boss comes down the hall. He goes, well, how'd it go? And I said, well, I think he's in great shape. And he goes, so he'll go into academics? I said, no, he's going into private practice. And he goes, what did you do? And I said, well, this is a guy who actually knows exactly what he wants to do and why, and he's more than qualified to do it. So why would we interfere with that? He's given us 5 years or 6 years of his life to learn urology, and we've taught it to him, even though he doesn't really need all the lessons we've given him. We pat him on the back, and he's going to make us proud. And isn't that okay? And the chair kind of shook his head and walked out. So there you go.
But in all fairness, right, he achieved his 3 Ps, right? Performance, purpose, passion, and it wasn't necessarily aligned with what you or I do, but he achieved his successes, and that's wonderful. I mean, that's all you could hope for people you care about, right?
Yeah, you got it.
Good. So at this point, I'll kind of summarize some of the things that we went through,
of course,
and then ask you if you have anything else you want to talk about. But I think you gave some really nice, tangible advice for people considering leadership. You talked about taking on leadership roles outside of your institution to kind of build experience, whether it's in your section or your society or whatever that may be. You talked about leading by example. You talked about knowing your audience and being a good listener. And some of the kind of mindful strategies you brought throughout the talk were being self-aware, knowing the people in the room. And one of the hints you gave for doing that was assume you're in the lowest quartile of intelligence. And that brings about humility, right? Which is another mindful approach. And it's humility, being a good listener. And you also talked about how you know you're ready for leadership. And the 3 skills you said a good leader has: they can master logistics, manage crises, but also have common sense or emotional intelligence. They can kind of assess the situation. But more importantly, you have to have a passion for it. This is something you want to do because there are going to be sacrifices you need to make. And so I thought it was a really thoughtful conversation today, and just want to give you the opportunity. If there's anything else you want to talk about or questions you want to pose, we're still going.
Well, I think, that was a brilliant review. So thanks for that. And I think the podcast is outstanding. So congratulations on all your efforts in doing this. And all I can say is, kudos to the effort. And I do think it's a tremendous medium. I listen to podcasts and daily messages, and you kind of filter out, what is relevant to you and what's not, and what excites you and what doesn't. And I think that's the key. There's this old adage, on the research world, it would be more data is always good, right? And in the sports world, more practice is always good. And I think, or more instruction is always better. I do think it's great to hear a lot of stuff, but I think the real sweet spot is there's always going to be the 1 or 2 things in a podcast that really flip the switch, and you write those down and you make a list. And I have that on my phone of some of the best things I've heard. And I think that's just a great part of doing what we do.
Well, thanks for your support, and thanks for all your input and conversation today. Thanks again, Dr. Steve Nakada.
Yeah, thank you, Phil.
All right. Thanks to the audience. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Bye-bye.